Welcome to the Calgary Sessions. This is episode number 59. I'm your host, Jeff Humphreys. Today's guest, I don't even know where this is going to go. I think it's going to be a fascinating conversation, just who he is and the space he's playing in and his journey to get there. So go ahead, name and who you are.
My name's Graeme Edge. I'm co-founder of Energy Disruptors. And I also have a bunch of other businesses as well, but the main thing I do is Energy Disruptors.
Yeah. So when so Brian, my sidekick, he's he's crazy about the energy industry. Loves it, came from it. So when we were noodling ideas of who should be on the show, he was like, you got to get Graeme. I'm like, how the fuck am I going to get Graeme? I'm not in the energy world.
Definitely not hard to get, don't worry.
So that's how this, Brian was the driver of this one, which is
Nice.
Really cool that you said yes. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
The Energy Disruptor show is a really cool event that we were at 8 weeks ago, which is kind of hard. Like we were saying off camera, It was 8 weeks. So it'd be cool to kind of weave the story till we get there. And then I never do research on people. I'm like, who is this Graeme guy? So I Googled it and found like all the businesses that you're involved with, which we might need 10 podcasts to cover everything. So,
and just to clarify, I'm not a member of the Moody Blues. Okay? And 68 years old or whatever comes up.
You always have to
I always have to proviso that. Right?
Totally. A little context for who you are. So this is going to be a fun conversation for me.
Awesome.
I think,
likewise.
Yeah, I think what you've been up to and how you pulled it off is fascinating to me. So, I like the guests to go back to a point in time, as they're a youngster, whatever age, junior high, elementary, whatever, back to a time where things started to connect for you. Like you realized what your interests were, whether it's sport or whether it was, school or how you were raised. So just go back to a time when, the light started to come on. For me, it was, if somebody asked me that, I'd be like, I don't know. From 0 to 8, I don't really remember life.
Yeah, I've got a terrible memory.
Yeah, me too.
That time period.
I'm like, yeah. But there's a point in your life where things started to connect with you, and I'd like the guests to go back to that point in time.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. I've not been asked that before.
I guess, I'm a thinker over here.
This is good. This is good. So probably the first moment that comes to mind. So I grew up in a little village in the north of Scotland, so kind of middle of nowhere. So
like little?
Like little, there's, maybe 1,000 people.
It's like a shire.
Yeah, like literally little village and right on the edge of the Highlands. So if you had almost a postcard of Scotland with like Highland cows and all that shit, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of where I grew up.
Yep.
Went to the local school on the road, 5-minute walk. And then probably the big turning point when I was a kid, when I was about 10, I actually won a tennis scholarship to go to school in England. So I went to boarding school. So it was one of these weird dislocations of, I'm going to this local school, tiny village in Scotland. Mm-hmm. Then the next minute, I'm down living near London, staying with my uncle at the weekends, Monday to Friday at boarding school. Everyone at the school's like, who the fuck's this weird kid from the north of Scotland?
Hillbilly.
Yeah, who's the hillbilly? Like, what? And, so that was... but thinking back to my childhood, I think the common thread was just sport. Like, I loved sport and competing. And I've always kind of had that in my DNA. But that's the moment that would stick out when I first moved away.
When you were growing up, did your parents... Did they just kind of force you into sport? Did they just let you try whatever you wanted to and tennis like stuck with you and you got decent at it? Or how'd that even?
Yeah, I think so. So both my parents were pretty active and sporty when they were kids. Mm-hmm. And I'd say it was probably mainly my dad. So my mum has her own business and she was working like all hours, right?
Doing what?
So she's actually a fashion designer and a couturier.
Still.
So
Okay.
She started a business, believe it or not, when she was about 16, and she's 74 now. She won't like me saying that on this. But so you think of the period of time, right, that she's run her own business.
Yep.
But because she was working so much, basically my grandmother brought me up. So she lived with us as my mum's mum. Mm-hmm. And my dad didn't have the same kind of demanding job that with my mum's business.
Yep.
So really it was my dad taking me to different things and mountain biking, and I started skiing when I was, I think, 3 or 4. And then I can't even remember how I got into tennis. I think there was a kind of my elementary school, there was, the softball tennis, and I tried it and I just loved it. So that was when I went on this kind of tear. So what definitely wasn't them pushing me. It was more, I had that kind of internal drive that I wanted to compete.
And you say you went on a tear. Like, how long did the tennis thing go for?
So I would say I started playing seriously when I was probably 7 or 8.
Yep.
And by that age, it was quite obvious I had a bit of talent.
Yep.
And I would say I played competitively up until I was about 15 or 16.
Okay.
And then I got injured. I got tennis elbow.
Oh, yeah.
And as I started to get older, then I started playing other sports.
Yep.
So I started playing a lot of golf, and really then kind of transitioned from pretty much giving up tennis, actually, to then I was playing a lot of golf and lots of other sports. So that was a definite common thread throughout my childhood.
So when you left home, so that was for junior high? Grades?
No, great. So what would that be? So 10, I would have been grade 5.
Okay.
So actually, that was a big thing, right? Because my daughter's 9, and I find it unimaginable the thought of sending her to boarding school, because you forget how young it is. I know it sounds silly. So I look at the dislocation of when I moved, because I went from this environment where my grandmother lived with us, and it was a typical kind of pretty supportive home environment, but I wanted to be an elite tennis player. So I had that conviction, I'll go to boarding school because I want to get better at tennis. Yeah,
and you knew what you were giving up.
I knew I was giving up.
But you could see that.
Yeah, but I do remember, I think back to that time, and I reckon I must have cried every night.
No way.
For probably 3-4 months when I first went to boarding school. So it was pretty tough.
Even though you were, you could say it out loud, you're okay with the idea.
I was okay with the idea.
And you get there and you're dealing with the different...
I got there and then I was like, holy shit, this is actually really hard. And it was fucking weird, right? You're in a dorm with 14 other kids, and the thing that blew my mind was all the rules. So I'd gone from not a lot of structure necessarily, and pretty headstrong kid, to suddenly, right, you've got to be in bed at this time, and this and this, and you can't walk across this piece of grass, and like really quite bizarre rules. So I found that pretty tough. But once I got through that first year, then it kind of unleashed my potential, because I think what I realized now as an adult, looking back, I was kind of struggling at school. I was not great at concentrating.
Yep.
Probably now I would be diagnosed with like ADHD or something.
All of it.
Yeah, all of it, right? But back then there was no.
Yeah.
You're just, oh god, he's the restless one that doesn't read the question properly, kind of thing. But what boarding school did give me was discipline, and the outlet was I played sport every day, which I absolutely loved.
Yep.
So looking back, overall it was positive, but it was pretty tough. You had to gain your independence quickly.
Do you spend much time looking back? Like, do you know, with your daughter being of the similar age, is that what's causing you to go back now?
This is going to sound maybe a bit odd, but I'm going through this process called the artist's way. So
what's this?
It's kind of about rediscovering your creativity.
Okay.
So
is this a structured process?
It is. So it's a book that was written back in the early 90s, and a lot of authors and a lot of creative people will use this to kind of rediscover their creativity. So the concept is that, like, your inner creative child, basically you lose that as you get older.
Yep.
Because
which makes sense.
It kind of gets crushed, right?
Yep.
And your creativity gets crushed out of you.
Yep.
So I'm kind of 3 weeks through that process.
Oh, so you're like...
So it's a 12-week process. So you follow the book and have to complete all these different exercises. But one of the things I'm going through in the last week is thinking about my childhood. And what are the things that I used to love doing? When I was 8 years old, what did I want to be? Those kind of conversations. Who were those advocates when I was a kid? Who were those people that diminished and crushed my spirit when I was a kid? It's quite an interesting process.
Is it a coincidence that you're 3 weeks into this program? You and I are now like having this conversation at the perfect time.
Yeah.
Do you give that any thought? Like, why those things happen?
So again, this might sound strange.
No,
but
P.S. None of this is strange.
Yeah,
this like you got me
week,
like tingling
it's like
right now.
synchronicity is one of the. That's almost like what this week is about.
Yep.
And it's about challenge yourself to be more open to possibilities. So I'll give you a weird example. So Monday last week, my car was in the shop getting new tires, and there was a problem, right? It was taking ages. So I had about 3 hours to kill. And I ended up striking up a conversation with a stranger when I was just having some food right at the bar. And it was one of these really impactful conversations. And when I first sat down, I got my laptop out. I was just going to do some work. And then the person next to me clearly wanted to kind of strike up a conversation. And because I was going through this process, I actually shut my laptop and thought, I'm gonna engage in this. Go. And then we had this incredible hour-long conversation. And so it's weird, but one of the things it does is challenge you to, be more open and look for when the universe is pointing you in the right direction. So yeah, you're catching me at a super interesting time where just at the beginning of going through that whole process.
Yeah, and I don't, there's all the weeks in the year. I send you a link to pick a day, and you pick this day, and it just happens that you're in the middle of this thought process.
Well, it's pretty random because we were meant to get together maybe a month ago, and then I was looking at last month. Yep. So yeah, there's it's funny when you first said that. My first thought was, no, that can't be. I'm going to choose not to see that as synchronicity, but then I've gone, actually, it is.
It's right there.
It is there, right? There's a reason why we're having this conversation in this moment right now. So yeah, interesting,
fascinating. Wild. It's. I don't give it a lot of thought either, but I think that just means you're going in the right direction. Yeah. You're moving in the right direction. You're making the right choices, and things are aligning. Yeah. And you say, synchronicity, like it's all in the same idea, but it's hard to, you being involved in so many businesses, can you actually make decisions based on that? Or is it the idea of just being more open, and then potentially those things start happening? Because it's a bit of a...
It's difficult, if there's any engineers watching this, they'd be like, what the fuck is this guy's talking about?
Two half creative
point
dudes.
Point A to point B, there's almost that concept.
Yep.
But there's certain things where previously I would have looked at this kind of thing and gone... maybe don't trust your intuition. Yeah. And when you don't trust your intuition, generally it doesn't go very well. Yeah. So what I try to look for is, what's my gut instinct telling me? Because rarely will that steer me in the wrong direction. Yeah. And the other person for me is my wife, Michelle, and my co-founder, Michelle. She has this incredible intuitive compass, if that makes sense. So normally if I'm thinking about a big decision, and both of us almost have like a sense check on our intuition. Yep. So that's a big thing. Whereas 5 years ago, I wouldn't have made decisions in that same way. Whereas we maybe as connected to my emotions.
Yeah. When you say your first reaction is like, I don't trust it.
Yeah.
Where's that? It's interesting. It's interesting. You can actually like you're actually seeing that thinking, and then you're choosing to go against it. Where's that coming from?
So it's so interesting what comes out of this process. So
I know it's like
you need to check this out, right?
Well, the cool thing about this, I clip these moments so I never forget them.
Yeah, I love it.
And then I go do my homework after the thing, because it's like
this is like, I was really skeptical because how I started the process was, Michelle is very, very creative and writes, and had said to me, you really need to do this. I think it's going to make a big difference. And how I would describe where we're at the moment, or where I'm feeling at right now, is it's almost like the next phase of my life. So the last phase I went through was probably around 2016 to 2018, where there was really profound change. This is when we set up Energy Disruptors, and it was like trial by fire, and there were a lot of really tough things that occurred during that period of time. And we can kind of maybe get into some of that stuff in a minute. But it's now we're at the beginning of this next phase, And I'm always challenging myself to be more open about what does that next phase involve. And so maybe part of that is why I caught that thought process is that's almost like an imposter syndrome, or that negative thought. Like my first thought when Michelle said do this was, well, I'm not creative. Like, why would I do this? I'm not a writer. I'm not a director or a podcaster. It's like, no, I think you actually really need to do this because you are creative, and this is going to enable you to kind of uncover that creativity in a bigger way.
So cool, man. And when you lead it with like, this might sound weird to me, you're like, I'm like, no, this makes so much sense to me. Because the cool thing is, I think it's very difficult to actually articulate these things. You know, like to actually understand that you're, you know, it's a little bit of the imposter syndrome, and to understand, you know, trusting your gut. It's tough to actually like put some boundaries around those thoughts. And if you can be a part of a process or some structure that gives you this like blueprint of like why things are happening.
Yeah, and there's certain tasks that I've had to complete, and I've been irritated, and I've had to explore, what is that? Why am I irritated? Why is that bothered me so much? So there's a lot going on right now with kind of thinking about what is next, having had almost some time to reflect. Because it's felt like actually it's the first time I felt like I've been able to properly reflect since really the beginning of COVID. It's kind of the first time in 3 years I've had to actually stop and think and breathe.
So then it's the kind of the perfect time. You get through the summit. You come off the high of it, pulling it off, ending, whatever that feels like, the exhaustion, whatever it is, and then to open up yourself to this idea. It's like the perfect time.
Yeah, I think it is. And one of the other things that I've done recently, which is kind of coinciding with this process, I've read a book called Imaginable by a lady called Jane McGonigal. And one of the whole concept is about how you better prepare yourself for the future and build more resilience. Because we're living in this world where it feels like the pace of change is accelerating, or even if the pace of change isn't accelerating, how much we hear about change is, because we're in this kind of 24-hour news cycle and constant social media and all this kind of stuff. So, and it can feel really overwhelming, and it can affect your mental health. And I certainly found through COVID the points where I was struggling with my mental health. But one of the things in this book is, so if you picked up your phone right now, go 10 years into the future, pick this exact day in 10 years time, and start to map out what you want your life to look like in 10 years. So where do you wake up? What's the environment you're in? Who is around you? Who's your life partner? Who are the people that are important to you? How do you feel about your work? How do you feel about the impact you're making? And then it's interesting because 10 years is enough time to make really profound change. But it's not so far into the future that you can't imagine the possibility of what 10 years looks like. So I've also been going through some of these things so that's been quite an interesting process, working through that.
You're in a spot right now.
Yes. Yeah.
But based, having some structure around you to go through this, does it actually feel like it all makes sense? Like it's not super uncomfortable?
Yeah, it's definitely not super uncomfortable. It's more the frustration of I want to get to the answer quicker. But what it's also meant is, having conversations with my parents and my brother, kind of asking, hey, do you remember this about our childhood? Or I've got this memory. Is that how you remember it? Asking more about actually my ancestors and their link to creativity and what they did. And I'll give you a silly example. I was speaking to my mum the other day, and I said to my mum, so was anyone any of your grandparents, were they creative? And my mum, for the first time, and I'm 40, and she never told me this, she's the third or fourth dress designer in a row in her in our family. And I never knew that. It's like, so her great grandmother was like a couturier back in the day, and my mum just thought never, why would that be relevant to me?
Crazy.
So that was kind of weird that you see that kind of lineage.
Did you look at your mom as a super creative when you were growing up? Did you understand that the designing and like how creative that process actually is?
No, definitely didn't appreciate it. I wouldn't even say I didn't appreciate it until probably the last 5 or 6 years.
Oh, so it's like
the level of creativity. I actually kind of saw my mum as this hard-nosed, workaholic,
Boss, yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
That her life obsession was her work and her customers. And it's probably not until the last 5, 6 years that I've realized the fact that she's made her creativity her living for 60 years or 55 years is kind of remarkable, because lots of us have creative pursuits, but very few of us can then turn it into something that is truly financially successful in a career.
Do you trying to figure out this creative piece that you have in you? Do you think there's more? You have more than you think you have? I just feel like growing up in that environment, and maybe, your perspective of your mom was hardworking and, just always working, but the creative energy that she has, do you think it's got to rub off on you? It's got to be in you.
You know, it's funny. Again, I never, if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, the last thing I would have described myself was creative.
So how would you have described yourself 5 years ago?
Well, this was before we started our businesses.
Yeah.
I was deeply unhappy in my career.
Just working for people.
I was like
climbing a corporate ladder.
It's like I was climbing a ladder that, when I got to near the top of the ladder, I was like, oh fuck, I don't want to be on this ladder.
This is what I get.
Yeah. So that was kind of this realization, right, that you climb to that summit, and then you're like, I don't like the view here, and I don't like what this is. So I'm not sure I had a clear sense of who I was 5, 6 years ago.
Yep.
And it was probably through Energy Disruptors changed the course of my life. That whole process when we, when we kind of launched it, and it was just so excruciating getting it going.
Yeah.
So,
And I've heard about this a little bit. I want to take you back before we get there.
Sure.
And you touched on it a little bit, but like, you're doing the corporate thing. Because it's always an interesting, when you talk to somebody that's running multiple businesses now and creating, launching a giant event, just what that looks like. Because a lot of people see people doing their own thing and like, how do they do that? They just decide to be their own boss. What they don't see is the 15, 12, 13 years of kind of doing the corporate thing, learning, figuring out what you don't want to do, maybe more so than what you do want to do. So taking it back to, coming out of university, what you're kind of looking at, what you're eyeing, what's interesting to you, or what career path you're about to get on.
It's hilarious what I first wanted to do when I finished uni. I wanted to go and work for Diageo and sell Smirnoff vodka. And I'm actually still like, no, I don't drink now. So the irony of that my dream was like, I'm going to go and sell vodka and like have lots of fun. And
where'd you go to school?
So I went to school in London.
Okay.
So I finished high school.
Yeah. At the boarding school?
This was a different boarding school now. So I went back to Scotland. Yep. And then it was one of these situations where I finished school at 18, had a brilliant summer. That kind of age where, life is, you don't have any responsibilities.
It's easy.
It's brilliant, right?
Yeah.
It's looking back, time of your life kind of thing. And then I ended up going to university to a school called UCL, which is one of the top 5 or 6 schools in the UK.
Okay.
To study economics. And it's probably the first major failure I had, because I massively fucked up school. So I actually got kicked out.
Just for being a deadbeat, partying too much?
I was like, so I think at the time I got my 3-year student loan in the first term. And I spent it all within 8 weeks.
No way.
I did, right?
You were the fun guy.
I was like Fun Bobby. Like I was like the crazy guy, right? And looking back, I caught my gap year, right? Because I ended up like really screwing up. I failed by like 1%. And it was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me, because really from, when we were talking about earlier, when I was 10 through to 18, I was, I got my academics together. I was pretty good at sports.
Yeah.
But then...
Like, not being an ego guy, but like high performer?
I think most people would describe me as pretty high performing, right? I was in all the kind of different sports teams and all this kind of stuff. So I was definitely on a high performance track. And then suddenly you get smacked in the face, right? Like you really fuck up. Like there's proper repercussions to this fuck up. So I then had to tell my parents, and that was like the worst, right? It's like, I failed one of the best universities in the UK. They're kicking me out. And it's like, what am I going to do next? So I ended up switching schools. But that taught me, I think it was humbling, and I needed that at that time. So then I finished university, and I moved back to Aberdeen. And the reason I moved back was Michelle, who was my girlfriend at the time, she was up in Aberdeen. So I didn't really want to go back to Aberdeen, but because Michelle was there, that was then. And then it was like, right, what am I going to do? And that whole process was, it's laughable now, but it's like looking in the newspaper for jobs. This is like 2003, 2004. The internet wasn't really necessarily like you weren't looking for jobs on the internet. And I fell into recruitment. It was one of these things. Literally, the first advert I saw was there's a job for a big recruitment company, and I went and interviewed them, and they almost would do this kind of, pretend you're doing a phone call to a candidate. And there'd be 20 of us lined up in this room, right? And it was trial by fire.
No, so you have to do your thing in front of all the people that want the same job?
And I remember I shit my pants.
Oh,
I was
that's
like,
horrible.
This is horrible, right? And it was an environment where, so I got through and I got the job, and but you had weekly and daily goals. And if you didn't meet your targets, like the amount of phone calls you had to make, you got cut.
That's it. Like literally how many cold calls you can make in a day.
Yeah, it was like slinging mud at the wall. And I lasted about almost a year.
Wow.
So by the time I was at a year, I was the second or third longest serving member of staff in a team of like 25 people, which tells you all you need to know about the turnover and the culture.
Torture.
So like spilled out of that, eventually missed a target and got cut. And one of my good friends who used to work for the same company was like, hey, there's a guy who in executive search, he needs a head of research. Went and met him, and we just hit it off. And I ended up moving into search, and that was kind of the start of the corporate thing. And so I then went, I figured really the next 10, 12 years, I kind of was in executive search, doing a lot of work in energy, but really the last 3-4 years not enjoying it, not feeling the same motivation.
Where were you living?
So by this point I was in Calgary. Okay. So we moved out to Calgary in 2007.
Because of the job?
Kind of job, and also Michelle's folks had moved out here in 2006. So we knew we didn't want to stay in Scotland. Okay. We knew and so once she graduated, we then decided, right, we want to move overseas. Canada would be pretty cool. We're both skiers. Yeah. So it was a mixture, and then how it kind of lined up with my jobs, I was able to make the move out.
Did you test Calgary first? Did you come for a vacation first, or you just like?
Yeah, we'd been out here a couple of times, and just liked it. Don't know. It was just, I think it was great being close to the mountains, and it was, back then it was nuts. 06, 07, the city was crazy. People lining up to buy houses. There's a huge buzz about it. But back to your question, when did I kind of step off that corporate thing? And let's be clear, I was never working for like huge companies. It was more small businesses. And
you're placing people? You're finding
people? So kind of the first 6 years, call it, of that, I was kind of placing people, running the projects. And then the latter 5 years, I was running the business. And so I kind of went from a transition of running the projects to running the full business. And you still have billing, and it's one of these environments where you constantly have revenue targets. And I kind of thrived in that, having a target. And I was pretty successful. I did a lot of placements and built a good book of work. But the last probably 2-3 years, I was like waking up in the morning, not really excited. Not feeling challenged anymore. But how we ended up starting Energy Disruptors in our businesses, it wasn't me being brave and suddenly waking up going, I'm an entrepreneur. And, it was actually the parent company of the company I was working for at the time ran into financial difficulty. So they went insolvent. So my old boss calls me and he's like, okay, bad news. Basically, the parent is insolvent. So that drags the Canadian entity that I was running into the insolvency process. So I made a snap decision, we'll buy the business. So I bought out the Canadian business, and it didn't cost a lot because you're negotiating with an insolvent parent. And within a few days, I'd realized I'd made a mistake.
Why?
Because I suddenly owned this business that I didn't want.
That you weren't into.
That I wasn't into. So it's like, what have I just done?
Mm-hmm.
What am I doing? And I've got all these clients saying to me, oh, we'll come with you and, you know, in your new business. So that was a big moment. That was like the first, you know, I talked about that first phase. That was like the phase one. So then what happened was Michelle had said to me, look, you're not like fired up about this business at all. What's going on?
What's she doing when she's
So
here?
at this point, she was at home with the kids because we just had Harry, I think, was one at that time, our youngest. So she previously worked for Shell, had done the big corporate thing, got a bit disillusioned with it. She was then at home, you know, the kids were wee toots kind of thing. And she was saying to me, like, I feel like you need some inspiration. There's an event coming up in the UK that Richard Branson's hosting. I just have a feeling that you're meant to go to this event.
Come on, no way.
Yeah, so she'd seen it on social media and she's like, I know this sounds fucking weird, but I have this really visceral feeling that you need to go to this thing in the UK. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we'd probably been, it was about 3 months post starting, like buying the business.
Yeah.
And I was, you know, I was angry at myself that I wasn't motivated. And I felt like a couple of team members had come with me and I felt like I was letting them down. So anyway, eventually Michelle convinces me to go. And
what was there? Was it the conference? What was it that she thought you would get that you would enjoy? Was it the industry? Was it the topics? Was it like what do you think it was?
That event was called Virgin Disruptors.
Okay.
And it was all about entrepreneurs who were making impact. So I suppose now you would call it impact entrepreneurs, right? But that wasn't really a thing in 2016. So I think it was a combination. I'd always been a Richard Branson fan. Like I'd read, like, you know, a lot of his autobiographies, and particularly growing up in the UK, he was like a bit of a hero in terms of for entrepreneurship, kind of like the Bill Gates of the UK kind of thing. But he was a bit of a maverick, right? That kind of appealed to me. And yeah, it was literally just,
he's going to be there.
He's going to be there.
Let's go check it.
It's all these entrepreneurs. You should go. And I was like, what a waste of money. Why would I go? There's nothing to do with energy. Like, why? And Michelle was adamant. So she bought me the ticket.
Awesome.
And that then, so what ended up happening then was, it was in an auditorium, you know, a theatre, 600 people. And I randomly sat next to a guy called Roger Atkins. And Roger turned out to be one of the top experts in the world on electric vehicles. And Roger and I, you know, when you meet someone, you just have that instant connection. So we just had this instant connection. So we hung out the whole day. And then there was an individual emceeing the event, and she was absolutely incredible. And I was kind of mind blown by this lady who was hosting everything, and she was interviewing Richard and all this kind of stuff.
Just her tone, her
how she kind of just everything about her. I was just absolutely blown away by her. Anyway, that individual turned out to be Holly, who now hosts Energy Disruptors. So meeting Roger, seeing Holly, I was then flying back to Calgary the day after, and I've got all these ideas spinning in my head, and for the first time probably in years, I'm feeling like really fired up. And I'm you know, wherever I go, I typically have a notebook, and I kind of old school. I like to kind of write out ideas and notes. Okay. So I'm on the plane, and I can't sleep, and I'm like thinking about all these people I've met, and I just wrote Energy Disruptors ? And Roger, and I align with Holly. There was almost this idea of, what if we took a bit of inspiration from this event in the UK about entrepreneurs and kind of changing the thinking? What if we did something like this in Calgary, but did it on energy? And that was like the first seed of the idea for the summit.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And all on when you're pushing back on the idea of flying over there, little did you know it turns into the idea.
It turned into the idea. And it's funny because then the next iteration was, so I get home straight off the plane, and we go on to like GoDaddy. And I don't know why we did this, but we checked for energydisruptors.com and it was available. It's like $20. And we just bought it in that moment. And like, fuck it, if we never use it, at least we got the domain.
Whatever.
And that, it was weird, but buying the domain, it suddenly felt like, right, we've actually taken our first step. And then within a few days, I reached out to Holly on LinkedIn because I never met her in person because it was such a big event. So wrote her a note basically saying that I've got this idea for this energy thing. Would you have a chat with me? But I want to like heads up, never done an event, no money. It's half baked. No fucking clue why I'm even reaching out to you.
Got a domain name.
I had lots of, disclaimers before the note. And then it was one of those things I sent it and instantly I'm like, I need to recall that message. How do I recall that message on LinkedIn? And, it's like, there's no way to do it. And forgot about it. And then, a couple of weeks later, I have this note pop up. It's Holly. It's like, your note made me laugh. Like, let's have a chat. And then we got on a Zoom call and that was it, right? We hit it off. And it was then, right, we're going to do this. She was in.
What year was this?
That was late 2016, early 2017.
So the lights are on. You're like jamming. You're ready to go.
Yeah.
What's going on with the business? Are you like sloughing it off to team members to kind of run it for you, and you're kind of changing your focus?
I'm having to try and kind of keep the wheels on that enough that it's it's getting going. But really, all my energy is being poured into this seed of an idea. And we did a couple of things that were, looking back, crazy. Like, I honestly don't know what we were thinking. So we had the idea and then we're thinking, right, if we're going to do a big event, and the idea was quite simple, right? It was, we didn't like the conversation around energy transition and net zero. So we felt it was all kind of in silos and echo chambers, and you'd have like the renewables people hated oil and gas were like, well, we're the solution to everything. And nuclear people were like, no, we're the solution. And all these energy storage, and you had all these different pockets of people. And what we very quickly realized was none of them were really talking to each other. And they kind of all viewed each other with a lot of distrust.
And sorry, your background in energy was kind of working with companies to put people in place. So
exactly.
You were there, you were just kind of learning because you were kind of close to these.
I was really close to a lot of the companies. So I had a good enough understanding of the landscape. And so I wasn't a technical expert. I couldn't go and design a well or a battery, but I knew enough about the space that I had I could talk with credibility. And I could see almost the bigger picture piece. I think it was probably one of my strengths was all these kind of loose threads. And I'm going, well, why has no one brought this all together under one umbrella and brought these people together to try to drive change? And the idea was like, can we get all these people in a room and get them to start collaborating around actually accelerating energy transition? And what if we did it in Calgary? Almost like the last place on earth you'd think you would do something like this and call something Energy Disruptors. So that was kind of the initial seed. And then we thought, well, if we're going to do this and we're going to create this big summit, we need a speaker that's got credibility, because we don't have any credibility. It's
not you on stage.
We don't. Yeah, it's not like, who the fuck's this guy, right? There was no, we didn't have a track record. We'd never done an event before. So when we were thinking, right, we're going to go and get sponsors, we literally had a blank sheet of paper and this was the idea. So we thought, well, what if we went and got Richard Branson? What if we got him excited about the idea? And so that was kind of the first stage of what we were going to do. And then we decided, well, if we're going to do this, we should reach out to Virgin Unite, his charity. So we reached out to Virgin, we had some people here help us who had some connections to Virgin and Richard and people like Holly. And we basically got back from Virgin love the idea, guys, but Richard gets 1,000 invites a day. There's no way, like, what if you can't get this going? So we then went back to him and said, look, if we made a large donation to his charity, would he get involved and potentially speak?
Yep.
And when I say large donation, the first stage of the donation was going to be about $150,000. Large, right? That was the first stage. So we basically decided we were going to clear out the company bank accounts and put all our money on red effectively. And we wire transferred 150 grand to Virgin Unite, his charity.
Wild.
And I remember within half an hour, I was like, is this a scam? Oh shit, if we just sent all our money. And if someone said to me now, why did you guys do that? I honestly have no idea. No idea.
It's one of those moments that you hear about. You know, like those moments when people are building something and there's that moment when they have to make that decision to get this thing going.
Yeah.
And you're lucky that you and I are having the good conversation.
Yeah.
Because it went good.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of people that are in this similar spot and it is the wrong choice. And
definitely,
for whatever reason, you know, it worked out for you.
It did. So what that then enabled us to do is like, oh, Richard's son, like he's in now and they know we're serious.
Yeah.
So we could then go to sponsors and say, hey, we've got Richard Branson committed on this.
Yeah.
And that really changed the nature. But I'm making this sound like it was like A to B, but this took 6-7 months to work through all this and kind of figure out, right, that was the right stage.
Yeah.
And then we started going to sponsors.
Did you know that, the order of operations?
No.
Because you've never done events.
I had no idea. I didn't even know how to put a pitch together for a sponsorship.
But it makes sense when you look back, right? You're like thinking, I need the keynote. Okay, here's the keynote.
Yeah.
And then you reverse engineer. Okay, how do I get access to the keynote?
Yeah.
And then you get this. And then once you get the keynote, then you go to sponsors because they have money and they want to be associated with the guy.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense.
It does make sense now thinking like, but
because now you do
the
it
level that we committed at
yeah.
was unusual. It was pretty out there.
And I don't want to say on a whim.
It was pretty much.
But it was quick.
It was on a bit of a wing and a prayer.
Yeah.
But weirdly, we all felt that we had to do it. And I can't even really, I've tried to think like, why? Why did we feel so strongly that we were on the right path? So there's a bunch of stuff about that phase, like 16 to 18, that was really difficult. So kids were 1 and 3 at that time. I was super stressed, like really fucking stressed. And I remember we were about 6 months out from the first event, which we hosted in May of 2018.
Okay.
And at that point, we were looking at a loss of about $600,000 or $700,000 that we were going to eat personally.
You knew that before the event even happened.
Yeah. Okay. So we'd cashed in our pension, we cashed in our RSPs. Like we were like all in, like fully committed.
Which that's at a whole different level of being uncomfortable. Like that's,
I mean, I like it's. I'm not ashamed to admit. You know, I met probably the lowest point was around that Christmas. Michelle was grocery shopping, and her credit card bounced. She's trying to pay for like $100 of groceries, $150 of groceries, and her credit card bounced. So I get a panic phone call. Michelle's like at Co-op trying to pay for groceries. And I'm thinking, what the fuck have I done here? What am I doing? And I remember, because rewind 2 years ago, pre then, it's like we're in good financial shape.
Yeah.
Didn't like what I was doing, but we're in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
And none of our family really understood it. Like they were all going like, what are you doing? Like they didn't know the extent of how bad it was.
Yeah.
And so what I had decided was, in my real, fucking stupidity at the time, I was so stressed that I was drinking every night at this point. So I was like, right, I can't even manage how bad I'm feeling. It felt like, it's the only time in my life where I felt like the walls are closing in. So it got to the point where I wasn't like waking up going, I want, neck a bottle of vodka.
Yeah.
But every night I was like, I would have a bath, listen to like classical music, go and make like a double or triple vodka and like ginger beer. And I'd sit in the bath for like 2 hours, almost wanting the bath to swallow me.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, and then we stumbled through kind of 2018.
Yeah.
So we get to the event and we'd managed to close the gap. And I knew, I hadn't told the team, I knew that we were still going to lose money.
Yeah.
But I knew if I told the team, it would destroy them. Like it would take all the momentum and the wind out the sails. So we ended up losing just over $200,000 on the first summit. And from the outside looking in, everyone would have gone, wow, it was so successful. Like, oh my God.
It looked like it was?
I barely remember the first event. I was so tired. I've never in my life been that tired. Because for pretty much 2 years, I'd worked, and I'm not exaggerating, probably 100 hours a week. And I was drinking a lot, and I was just like, I was a mess.
Yep.
I was exhausted, completely burnt out. So we get through the first event, and it took me 6 months to recover.
Yep.
It took me fully 6 months. But about 2 months in, I realized if we're ever going to do this again, that I need to quit alcohol, make some really big changes. And that was kind of a profound turning point in my life in terms of what kind of happened next because of that.
And you obviously knew you had to make a change because it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And because your brain's probably not functioning at a high enough level to make good decisions because it's polluted.
Yeah.
So you decide to do that by yourself, cold turkey?
So what happened was I got so drunk at Michelle's birthday just after the event, like lying in the street drunk, right? And I'm thinking like, the time I'm like 35 and I'm just going, what the fuck am I doing? I remember waking up the next day and it wasn't like, I was just like, got really drunk, right? Nothing super bad happened.
Yep.
But I just remember waking up feeling this deep shame, like really deep shame the next day, really embarrassed of how I'd behaved. And it was like, I couldn't even process how I was feeling because there was just so much there. So I read a blog about someone who'd given up alcohol for a year. And it's like in that moment, I just decided that's it. And I suppose one of the strengths of my personality is when I get an idea in my head, I tend to be like a dog with a bone and I'm all in. So that was almost 5 years ago. And I've never had a relapse, never drunk since, not had a drop of alcohol. It was like, and again, I want to be clear, it wasn't like, definitely had a problem with alcohol, but it wasn't like the only determining factor, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But what I realized was from a mental health perspective, removing that was going to really, and I did not realize fully the transformation that would have on my potential and the capacity the performance I was able to put in. It probably took me a couple of years to actually realize, holy shit, like the biggest personal change I ever made, that was it. Like that was a game changer.
Because you're clean and then you can perform. You can do things that you just couldn't do before because you weren't.
And it went deeper than that. It was, I actually had to process my emotions and how I was feeling about all this stuff. So often what people would do is you use alcohol to celebrate and use alcohol to dull down pain.
Yep.
And by the way, lots of people can consume alcohol in a responsible manner, but I was one of those people that, one beer would be 2 beers, would be 3 beers, would be, I'm now dancing on the table at 3 a.m. I was that kind of, that kind of person. So I recognized that and it wasn't just about the business, right? It was like, if I'm going to be a good husband and a good dad, I've got to make some, and that was a really big shift in my thinking.
Was there any pressure, family members or people suggesting that you should make this change, or was it just like you realized it and it was like it's time to change?
Well, it was interesting, right? Because there's a perception that comes with being Scottish and alcohol and like life and soul. Like I was one of the, if not like the ringleader of my friends, like.
Right.
if there's a night out,
Yeah.
I was probably first on the list, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're going from like fun Bobby
Mm-hmm.
to what the hell? He's sober now, and
Who's
he's
the
not
stiff?
like, who's the stiff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say my friends initially were probably skeptical,
Yeah.
and most of my friends from Scotland. But now it's like totally normal. But within the first year, it was like, oh my God, how long is this going to last? Like, they were all thinking it was just a small phase, right?
Yeah. So after you decide to quit, and then does that give you the energy to look at to spin up the next event, or are you looking at, doing something totally different?
So we took that summer off. So we did the event May of 18.
Yeah.
And we were, it wasn't just me, obviously Michelle we were exhausted.
Yep.
Really now looking back, we were burnt out.
Yep.
So, but by the end of that year, we were starting to think, okay, maybe we do another one. And we had all the sponsors coming to us saying, you've got to do this again. And we'd had such good feedback on the first one.
Yep.
And then subsequently, the first event had won Canada's Best Conference for that year, which was a huge thing, right? In a way, like, we didn't realize how big a deal it was at the time.
Because you couldn't see it.
We couldn't see it. We were too close to it.
And you knew what was happening behind the scenes too.
We knew it, and we kind of, it didn't feel authentic because it hadn't made money. We kind of like, well, if anyone knew the reality of this. So in some ways it might sound odd, but the second one was almost proving to ourselves, could we do it again?
Yeah.
Was it just a fluke, the first one? So in many ways, the second one was about, could we actually do it? Was it a one-off?
Yep.
Could we evolve it? And then we came out the second one and realized, we can actually do this.
When was that one?
That was late 2019. That was September of 19.
Okay. So
and then the pandemic hit. And then it was, you're facing reality of, you've got a business that is doing millions of dollars of revenue, and then literally a day later it's zero.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a gradual decline. It fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
And then it was really, what the hell are we going to do?
Yeah.
How are we going to survive this? That was pretty rough.
Because the second one went good.
Second one went really good. Second one made money.
Yep.
We got really good feedback.
Yep. So good guests. The people that attended it found it beneficial.
And I think we evolved it from the first one. There were things in the first one. You're learning as you go through this, and we'd scaled it up so rapidly that it was a point of maturity where, it was like almost ahead of where it should have been, if that makes sense. But what also had happened was the behind the scenes was pretty shaky, right? We didn't have a lot of systems and infrastructure, and because it wasn't really even it was still just an idea.
Yeah.
It wasn't we didn't think it had any permanency. We were like, well, it's cool, it's fun, we'll do another one.
Like your gut's kind of driving this?
Gut's still driving it. So the second one, we came out of that, and we had all these sponsors kind of fawning over us, going, you got to take this to Houston and Singapore and new and existing partners. Like, everyone's like, oh my God, like, what's next? And then, reality slaps you in the face. And I found that tough early COVID because I felt resentful. If I'm looking back, I felt like the rug had been pulled just as we'd managed to get to a point where it was starting to be successful and stable. And I really struggled with that initially. I felt angry, actually.
Which makes complete sense, right? Like, to actually put a win on the board.
Yes.
And to understand that you had positive momentum, opportunities were probably staring at you, and then something out of your control just flips it all off.
Yeah. So that first 3-4 months was, and eventually it was like, Michelle said to me, you just snap the fuck out of this. Like, if you're going to
put it to bed,
there's nothing we can do. It's totally out with your control. And then bizarrely, I got invited, and maybe this is about synchronicity and, things happening for certain reasons. Someone at the UFC had invited me to be a mentor on a hackathon about the future of Calgary. So at this point, the pandemic's like 3-4 months in, and you remember then it was like you didn't even want to touch your door handle. You know, it's like
drops off dinner. You're like,
yeah,
fuck, what am I
exactly.
going to do here?
I was washing my groceries. You know, like Lysoling my groceries, like all of us, right? You know, it was so crazy.
Yeah.
And so I think it was MOU and UC and I can't remember the other group had put on this hackathon, and the premise of the hackathon was basically, can we do some community initiatives that would help support small businesses early in the pandemic? And what they were going to do was get MBA students to basically come up with ideas and then try to win this hackathon with the best idea.
Yep.
So I was assigned as a mentor, and I remember I got assigned to the tourism and something category, and I'm like, the fuck, I know, I obviously think I'm like some events person.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not an events person, and you've put me in this tourism thing. Like, what value can I bring?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I ended up really enjoying the process, and I got paired up with these MBA students, and they had this idea of what if we did like a community-wide scavenger hunt in Calgary. So I then roped in Michelle. And Michelle and I then, after the students that we were mentoring won the hackathon, we launched this thing called the Great YYC Staycation. And we actually started this little business. And the idea was, could we create a scavenger hunt that would support local businesses? And so we got that spun up. We managed to raise a couple $100,000 within like a week. And we had 7,000 Calgarians take part in that scavenger hunt over 5 weeks. They had to complete like 250 tasks.
Wow.
I think we had about $100,000 of prizes. And it got like loads and loads of attention. And that one little community project kind of lifted me out of my funk, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Just gave you, got you out of your head. Probably got you.
It did.
And to be creative and working with people that are, you're working with a bunch of people that are in the same situation, you know, something got turned off in their life, but they choose to go and do something with it.
Yeah. And it felt good to be just doing something, right? Not sitting idle, stretching our brains. Yeah. And so that was 2020. And then it was, okay, 21 was, well, maybe we can start thinking about the summit again. Yeah. So that's been... Anyway, sorry, that's like a lot, but that's like I hope it gives you a bit of the context, the background.
Because people always see the highlights.
Yes.
They see you cruising around the show 8 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Looks amazing. There's some wild people talking.
Yeah.
It's a lot going on, and you're just kind of cruising around doing your thing. They see that as like, oh, this guy's got it figured out. He's got it all made.
Yeah.
Little, there's a story behind everything.
Yeah.
And I think the stories need to be told so people have context, so they understand it's not just to wake up and pull this thing off. It's like work and pain and more pain. And
yeah, and I think I'm learning to be more vulnerable. So I wouldn't have had this conversation 4 or 5 years ago, right? I wouldn't have wanted to admit where we screwed up, where the shortcomings or the challenges, some of the personal things we had to change.
Yep.
So I've definitely, and maybe that's also, it's funny, the other thing aside from kind of mental health and being able to manage pressure better without booze, the other thing it really helped me with was to regulate my moods and also to build true confidence. Yep. So if you'd got a bunch of my friends together a decade ago and said, where would you rate Graeme on a scale of 1 to 10 on confidence? They would probably say like 12. He's an arrogant little bastard, right? Yeah. But actually, the reality was not that. I actually, thinking back, I wasn't actually. It was a bit of a facade. Yeah. Often with highly, confident people, some of it is, and so in a way, stripping that all back, removing the alcohol. Yep. As a confidence booster, I actually had to almost get comfortable with going to events sober and realizing actually I want to still be interesting and not be that stiff, awkward guy. And so I'm actually going to have to build deep, true confidence. And that's one of the things that's changed in the last 4 or 5 years is that transition, if that makes sense, on true confidence.
And is that you figuring all that out?
No, definitely not.
Because it's a super thoughtful, progressive move.
No, that's been a combination of friends and Michelle and reading lots and reflecting and other people's observations, really thinking about. And I suppose when you look at all these kind of trials and tribulations, you go, you know, what's it teaching us? So in those tough moments, there's times if I'm having a bad day, I'll look at friends who've stayed on that corporate ladder, and I will feel resentful. I'll go, oh fuck, I wish I had a pension, and
Just
I wish
check showing up.
Yeah, and I wish I didn't have to worry about always knowing that every month I need to deliver and bring, and it's only on, not only on me, on our team, that you feel sometimes that weight of responsibility can be overwhelming. So you're observing almost like the imposter syndrome and those voices that are saying give up, and so part of it is the capacity to absorb that pain, and part of it is the willingness to not stop. You know, it's almost I still have that sense of conviction. I still wake up in the morning feeling energized. So despite the challenge, I go, and I also try to remind myself where I was 5-6 years ago when I was waking up not motivated. And I hated that. I really disliked that feeling, and I don't have that problem anymore.
You just got new problems.
I got other problems, but that's.
But you're willing to. You're just willing to handle those or deal with them or give them energy and fix them versus because you can fix them. You're not relying on a big corporate company that you're just there and you got to suffer with whatever they decide.
Well, and what the plus side of that is, you have freedom. So I have full autonomy, which is quite unusual. So I want to do a podcast during the day on a Monday. I want to go and ski on a Wednesday because there's good conditions. I can make those decisions. I'm empowered because I have that self-autonomy. So thinking back to where did that come from, I actually think I'm more like my mum than I care to admit.
I'm like,
you know,
I'm hearing the story for the first time.
Yeah.
And you just touch on your mum, but I'm just like, oh, she's been doing her own thing for all these years. She's creative and she's a hardworking person.
Fiercely independent, right? And so you probably absorb that stuff growing up that you don't even necessarily realize it. That you've got this influence that's like basically make your own way, be your own boss, determine your own destiny. At some point that sinks in.
So now knowing that with your kids, how does that all tie together? Do you just empower them to do their own thing and just be a good example and let them figure it out? So it's really interesting with our kids because, again, I'd say how we're approaching raising our kids is quite different today to what it was 3-4 years ago. So...
based on just giving this a little more thought and just being
well, what we spend a lot of time thinking about is what's the resilience and capacity we want to give our kids. So, and are we prepared to swim against the tide in how we do that, right? Because the career choices we've made are quite unconventional. So if I look at kind of our friend group and our neighbors, we kind of stick out, right, in terms of it's pretty unusual. Maybe it's not that unusual, but it set in our group. There's not that many entrepreneurs, not that many people who are kind of trying to take on certain big goals. So we then start thinking about our kids and okay, what are the skills and what are the things that we want them to have, and a big thing is the capacity for happiness. And one of the people that has massively shaped us is a guy called Ken Robinson, who sadly died a couple of years ago, but Ken spoke at our 2019 event about creativity. And he was one of the top kind of education pioneers of his time. And one of the things he's really known for is his TED talk, Why Do Schools Kill Creativity? And that's the most viewed TED Talk ever. It's been viewed, I think, almost 200 million times.
Wild.
So we had a chance to work with Seken and hang out with him, and we've read his books, and he's a massive hero of ours. But one of the things he really believes is that you've got this industrialized school system that is not necessarily fit for purpose in the world that we live in today. Even down to how long lessons are and how classrooms are structured. And so we've kind of gone down this rabbit hole of how do we almost go against that system.
Yep.
So we're homeschooling our kids.
Cool.
We've got, we're really trying to, build their entrepreneurship, and they're only 7 and 9, right?
Awesome.
Sense of fun.
Yeah.
So, but you get a lot of raised eyebrows
I can't
because
imagine,
people
dude.
like
Nobody does it.
Who are the weird people with
The fucking kooks next door.
like, what the fuck? Like, yeah, exactly. We're those people for sure. Yeah.
When you can look back and realize, all the influences you had growing up that kind of shaped you into what you're doing right now. If you can figure that out now, and your kids are this young, and you get to help them, like, for them to be at whatever age, 18, 19, 20, 25, and be very confident of what they're interested in and what they're good at.
Yeah.
Aren't you setting them up to just succeed?
You hope so, but you also, it takes bravery and courage because you're going against conventional wisdom,
it's
right?
easy for me to say, I don't have kids.
Yeah.
And so it's easy for me to, like...
It's almost the worst thing is the judgment from other
dude.
parents. Because it's like, oh fuck, how are we gonna explain this, right?
Yeah.
But I think as we're getting more confident in those decisions, we're feeling less of a need to explain it.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like what we're doing in our work life. Actually, we don't need to explain it as much as we did 5 or 6 years ago because we're more confident in ourselves and the decision that we've made.
Do you also talk about it differently? From 5 years ago to today, is there a different tone or a different message or a different way to articulate why you're doing what you're doing?
Again, it might sound a bit strange, but I almost feel like we're learning to honor what we're doing properly. I think we didn't actually honor the event and the initiative enough. It was almost like it's a temporary thing. Yeah. We almost had
this quick though, right?
It happened quick, and it was almost this like mindset of, in some ways it was self-protection, right? Yeah. If something fucked up or we couldn't deliver, like one of my friends said to me, the thing about this event, it's like you have to get naked in front of 2,500 people, and it's quite brave to be willing to do that, and because you're kind of asking to be judged by 2,500 people, and that you can't get everything right because there's thousands and thousands of details. Yep. And you'll a certain speaker might not deliver or fall flat, or you got a certain issue with a partner. Yep. But that you still have to be willing to be courageous. So I think I'm learning to probably recognize that actually it has some permanence, hopefully, and longevity. Yep. And we have to treat it with that sense of permanence. Whereas before it was like, if it doesn't work out, we can wind it up kind of thing. So that's maybe the change in thinking.
That makes sense. It's been fascinating. So here's what a lot of people don't know. I never talk about this. I don't do any research on anybody. Yep. And the reason I don't do any research is because to experience what just happened here and to hear like your journey, and not just like, hey, I put all these wins on the board, like it's not this chronological, like check. It's actually like a story. And that's why I will not research anybody, because then if you're just asking for the highlights of somebody's life, it's not that interesting.
No. And it's a sanitized version of often the highlights.
Totally. So this has been one of the most fascinating ones.
Oh, thanks so much.
59 in and I had no idea what I was walking into. It's like it's the basic checks, right? Good person, he's doing something cool. Those are the two boxes that need to be checked to sit down with somebody. Yeah, and that's it. And it was very interesting just listening to you talk about when you preface, you're like, this might sound silly or this, and I'm like, dude, I'm thinking the exact same thing. You understand the way I think. So it was really, really cool, man. The way I end the show is I ask one question. When I say Calgary, where's your head go?
opportunity. Yeah.
Which
I think that we're at this incredible tipping point for the city. We've got, not to get into all the politics, we've always got a very important election coming up next year, provincially. I'm very much in the camp of we need to continue to transform and lean into change in a positive way.
Yep.
And one of the things that gives me a lot of confidence in the city is just this. I get to meet so many great leaders and people. Like there's a different energy about the city today than there was 5 or 6 years ago. So that excites me. So yeah, opportunity is the word that comes to mind.
It's cool, man. Yeah, I can't thank you enough.
Not at all. Thanks so much for having me on. And
yeah,
it was cool to have this chat, and
totally.
Some of this you haven't shared before, so it was cool to kind of go back to some of these moments that have been pretty important.
Yeah, man, I agree. And for me, it's like I said, to kick this whole thing off, I'm like, well, how the fuck are we gonna get access to Graeme? Because there's a hierarchy, right? You gotta understand where you're punching, and for the only reason we're sitting down is because of Jackson and Tui. So it's it's all about connections. It's all about relationships.
Yeah.
And I appreciate where you punch in this city. So I really appreciate your time.
No, so I really appreciate having me on. It was a lot of fun to have the chat, and good luck with episode 60 coming up as well.
Man. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much.